Hey everybody, welcome to You, Me, and YTV. I'm your host, Ryan Stick, and today we are jumping into part 2 of my interview with John Semper, the producer and head writer of Spider-Man, the animated series. Now you're probably asking yourself, hey, where the heck is part 1? Well, that's on my other YouTube page, The Ryan Stick Show. I'm kind of doing this crossover event, if you will, a Marvel team up. In part 1, we jump into some amazing things, including the fight to get the show on the air, the secret behind that amazing X-Men crossover, who almost played Spider-Man, and much, much more. Today, we're delving into... Well, actually, I don't even have to tell you because you're about to see it. And I should know right before we go, I look a little different when we shot this because it was a few weeks ago, and I've gotten a little bit more Ben Reilly in the hair since then, for those of you who can appreciate the reference. And without further ado, let's jump into part 2 of my interview with the amazing John Semper.
Did you grow up in Canada? Were you alive in the 90s? Did you love YTV? Yeah, you did.
The decision to kind of like have Mary Jane fall off a bridge and then come back later, it definitely took away the whole happily ever after idea when you find out that Mary Jane is actually kind of a clone, kind of like Hydro Man. And this is over a span of years. When you have to wait week for episode, that's kind of crazy that you only resolved Mary Jane falling off of a bridge into a portal so long after. And then that resolution wasn't even a real resolution. So I'm rewatching these episodes being like, that redhead's fake. Like, you know, you're having a wedding. Yeah, it's not her though. Yeah. she's doing all this stuff, this incredible character development. He's telling her secret identity. I'm like, no, the real Mary Jane fell in a portal. She has no idea Peter Spider-Man. How did you go about deciding Mary Jane's arc and unfortunate fate?
Well, you work your way backwards from certain beats that you want to hit. First of all, I absolutely wanted to bring Turning Point, the comic book, to life. Absolutely. I mean, I read it as a kid. I was blown away by it. That whole Turning Point arc where the Green Goblin figures out that Peter is Spider-Man, and when I read that in comic book form, I had the same reaction that you had. Seeing the X-Men or finding out that Mary Jane wasn't the real Mary Jane. It literally. I mean, I was holding in my hands a comic book, and there was a character dying whom I had fallen in love with. And it was a powerful impact. And so those issues, the Turning Point and I think the one that came after, I absolutely knew that at some point I wanted to bring those to life. I maybe even knew that from the very beginning, and I was just waiting, so I knew that I was going to bring in the Green Goblin. I knew that I was going to build him up, and I knew that I was going to do Turning Point. So I knew that. What I had to figure out was who was going to fall off the bridge and how they were going to die. Well, by that time, we had done the spot, and we had created this, time dilation dimensional portal machine. And I thought, well, that could be a pretty good metaphor for death. If, this machine falls off the bridge and twirling, it gets knocked and turns itself on. She falls through the portal. I mean, it was beautifully staged. Bob did a very good job staging it. I think we did a very good job describing it in the script. Because the great thing is that Peter doesn't know that she fell through the portal.
No.
That's the trick.
Ooh.
It isn't, oh my God, Mary Jane's fallen through a portal. It's, oh my God, Mary Jane fell and now I can't find her. She must be dead. And so we did death without doing death, which I thought was pretty damn clever. The other thing I like about that episode is when he's standing on the bridge, he delivers about a full minute of soliloquy without there being any lip movement. It's all inner dialogue. It's just a guy standing on a bridge. I'm very proud of that because up until then, the only time you'd ever see anything like that might be anime. And I was a big fan of anime. I was I was a fan of anime before it was called anime. So I knew that kind of thing could be done, but you had to do it really well and stage it really well. And the fact that they let me get away with it was like a real milestone for me. So when I see that even now on screen, I'm very proud of that moment. Okay, that having been done, the biggest thing going on, one of the biggest things going on during the 80s was the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane, if I'm not mistaken. This is the one they did in Shea Stadium or something like that. They had a big event. And I knew I wanted to do that. That was another milestone. I wanted to do the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane. So I thought, well, how can I work it? And then I thought, well, Mary Jane would have to come back. but wait a minute, what if she comes back and she's not really Mary Jane, but we don't know it for a whole bunch of episodes? I mean, it was all planned out, because at that point I was really planning out the arcs very carefully. And I knew that she wasn't the real Mary Jane. I knew that we were going to find out that she was a clone, because everything in Spider-Man comics at that moment was all this clone crap. And I
It's
thought, well,
awful.
if I'm gonna do clones, I'm gonna do it better than they do it in the comic books, because quite frankly, I think that animation writers are better than comic book writers. That's my own particular bias. There were a lot of things going on in the zeitgeist. Clones were happening. I knew I wanted to do the wedding. I kind of worked out all the details. The greatest thing that happened in that series was that you had one guy. Eventually, you had one guy plotting it out. So, I had to get a lot of approvals. I had to work with Avi. But after a while, it got to the point where, it just became my job. I just had to get the show out the door, and they left me alone. And there was no Marvel interference at that point, because Marvel was on the verge of bankruptcy. And so Avi had disconnected me from Marvel New York. So I didn't have to get any approvals from them. And then after a while, the network kind of backed off. The network guy got bored, and he wasn't interested in really having much input. So it was about halfway through the series when that happened. And I really could just do a show that came straight from my mind. Now, I had wonderful writers, Berkowitz and Mark Hoffmeyer, Stan Berkowitz, Mark Hoffmeyer, Jim Krieg, Ernie Altbecker, Meg McLaughlin, who's now Meg Wong. I had a staff around me that were good people. They're all still good friends of mine. And I could rely upon them to sort of carry out the show in the way that we were doing it. But I could sit there and plot it out. And I don't think you get that in this day and age. I don't know that you get a cartoon show anymore that one guy can sort of have the luxury of being able to figure out how it's going to go, at least as far as Marvel is concerned.
Yeah.
Because Marvel is such a huge entity now that they're not going to let one guy do an animated show. And so I think that's another thing that makes my Spider-Man show somewhat unique, is that for better or worse, and believe me, it wasn't given to me as any great gift. It was sort of like, okay, here, idiot, we think you know how to do it now.
Here's your Charlie Brown Christmas tree. Good luck with it. And you're like, It just needs a little love.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's what I did. It wasn't given to me as a great gift. It was given to me as, it's your job, go do your job. But I took it as a great gift. And I don't think you get that kind of show anymore, because it's not possible. So we'll see. We'll see what the new Spider-Man show looks like.
Well, yeah, we'll see. So we get into we talk about Mary Jane, we talk about Black Cat. I mean, first of all, as far as I'm concerned, and I totally agree with you, it's like you could definitely see the first season as, here villain of the week, but the second season, just we go into this is all Neogenic Nightmare. And then the third one, you have Sins of the Father, and you bring Daredevil in, and it's such a cool episode. It's such a cool crossover, because Daredevil at that point hadn't really been in animated anything.
Right.
And that was kind of my first exposure to Daredevil. And, now he's one of the most popular, thanks to the Netflix series, is one of the most popular Marvel characters out there. But, as a Marvel fan yourself, right before we talk about that last season, which deserves all the awards, was there any character that you were particularly adamant about bringing in that you had a little bit of a hesitancy from other people, and you're kind of glad you won your argument in a sense?
The character that I probably absolutely knew I wanted to bring to life, because he was my other favorite character, was Doctor Strange. So bringing Doctor Strange in was an absolute must, have happen for me. And I was very lucky, because after the first 13, I pretty much got my way with everything I wanted to do. And, I as I like to say, I was the early animated version of Kevin Feige. I had a lot of control. Again, not because it was any great gift. It was more like, here, fool, do your job and shut up. And I was smart enough to go, oh, okay. you know. Thank you for giving me this pile of garbage, which is actually gold. So that's really the way it worked.
What's the matter?
With all my superpowers, I was helpless. It took 3 normal women to save the world.
Anything wrong with that?
No, but I was hoping to be the only one to wear the superhero costume in the family. Of course, it'd probably look better on you anyway.
Going into that last season, I mean, we start off with the wedding, and we go into this arc, this giant arc called the Six Forgotten Warriors.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the Sinister Six, but in your show it's called something else, right? It was
The Insidious Six.
Yeah, the Insidious Six.
Right.
And we have this whole arc where all Spider-Man's greatest foes, they're all in Russia. And he's finding out that his parents are spies.
Yeah.
You hear nothing about his parents until this final season, and then they're spies. But actually, they were heroes. And here's Nick Fury, and here's Captain America. But then you also have all these Golden Age characters like the Wizard. And nowadays it's very like with writers like Ed Brubaker. When he started writing Captain America, he put a lot of emphasis about the 40s and the invaders and all these other stuff. But to me as a kid in the 90s, I had assumed comic books had been alive since I've been paying attention to them and cared nothing about old stories. But to reference the 40s so much and show so much love and show, I love the Destroyer arc. That Uncle Ben's best friend was this guy who, said, "Keep my suit, don't let me have it." And then his nephew ends up being Spider-Man. So and it's 5 episodes long. So right now you're seeing the manifestation of all the trust you were saying and all the experience of all these other seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Six Forgotten Warriors followed by, Return of Hydro Man, which is like this, oh, here's a breath. That was a huge arc. Here's some episodes. Here's a nice, Hydro Man. That should be an easy one. Followed into the Secret Wars. What the fuck? And then Spider Wars. Like, I finished this season. It was 4 a.m. I'm a puddle. And I'm like, my God, season 5 is the most ambitious, beautifully written season of fucking cartoons there was. Yeah. Tell me about going into the Six Forgotten Warriors, dude, because God, that whole season's like one arc. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's me going out of control. I mean, again, you had the advantage of one guy, being able to sort of do what he wanted, which was me. I was lucky enough to be that guy. And I think big. At one point, what happened was it became apparent that Jim Cameron wasn't going to be doing the Spider-Man movie.
Okay. Yeah. There was a little time where Jim Cameron was going to make a Spider-Man movie, right?
Yeah. And then he wasn't. And then it all kind of fell apart, which happens in Hollywood. And I was thinking one day, and I thought, well, 4 episodes, each episode is 22 minutes. 4 episodes is 88 minutes. 88 minutes of animation is a movie. It's a movie. So if I start thinking in terms of every 4 episodes is a movie, is a self-contained movie. So I went to my writers and I said, we're going to do a thing called the Spider-Man movies. And every 4 episodes or so, it's going to be a completely self-contained story that will connect up with the previous one and connect up with the one after, but it'll be its own self-contained thing. And then someday, if they release these on video, they can release them as features. There's only one company that ever did that. It was a company in Canada that released every one of these arcs as a separate VHS feature. They're the ones who figured out that was what I had in mind. But that was what I had in mind.
Bought them all.
That was what I had in mind. I think I have most of them. So you could literally, they're movies. They are movies. And I plotted them out as movies. So, they still had, beginning, middle, and end for every 22, but they were basically plotted out as movies because I thought, why not? Why not? When we used to screen the episodes in the first season, we were in the New World building, and the New World building had a theater. And the entire production crew would be invited into this theater, and we would watch the episode on the big screen. That's how I saw every episode for the very first time, was on the big screen. And I thought, holy crap, we're making movies. So by the time I got to the end and I had the kind of control that I wanted, I thought, I'm just going to make a whole bunch of movies. So the real Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movies, quite frankly, are in our series. And that's where you get the, Six Forgotten Warriors chapter this. I've always been fascinated by this idea of what happens to superheroes when they get older. And there was a thing that was being hugely popular, which was the Alan Moore Watchmen. Everybody was very excited about Watchmen right at that moment. And I thought, well, wait a minute, we could do our own version of Watchmen where, there's a mystery that is rooted in the past and in World War II. And I thought, well, who were the other Marvel characters, the timely comics characters? Now, mind you, we did not have the internet back then. These days, I just look them all up on the internet.
Yeah.
I go to Wikipedia. Didn't have that. So I actually found a company that was quite illegally, I would imagine, reproducing old comic books on microfiche.
Okay.
And I bought a used microfiche machine. I think I paid $100 for it, and I got this used microfiche machine. And I bought a whole bunch of these old timely comics. I researched every one of these heroes by reading these old comics, and so I found the heroes that I wanted to use. So really, it was our feature-length version of what would happen if Spider-Man did a story like The Watchmen. That's really what that was. I had so much fun with that story. I had Mira Furlan, the late Mira Furlan, as Silver Sable. Oh man, it was fun. It was so much fun being epic. I wanted the series to end on an epic note, and the series just got bigger and bigger and bigger until we get to the end where Spider-Man saves all of reality. So that was the joy for me, was being able to do these epic stories.
I love the Black Marvel reveal. That was my favorite one, where you're under the impression it's this rich guy who's like, best friend and chauffeur is just like was happy to be there. But it's like, no, he was the hero. So all these, between him and the Destroyer, like you really felt who had the least interesting powers, in a sense where, oh yeah, they're like Captain America. You're like, yeah, but the other ones can fly and scream and run. Yeah. But I also like the fact that you brought the Wizard into my life. And I see him appear. There's like little jokes and cameos in Jessica Jones season 2, but really the Wizard is the first the first incarnation of the Wizard was from your show, for sure, that I knew about.
I think that's one of the things that the show that makes the show important to so many, because it was such a gateway for young men like yourself to discover Marvel.
Of course. No, because I'm intimidated by a pile of comic books. That's intimidating. Mm-hmm. A few VHSs, bring it on. Okay, so we go into the Six Forgotten Warriors, beautiful arc, but then we, as we talked about the return of Hydro Man, in which Mary Jane is revealed to be a clone,
right?
And then we go into the Secret Wars. Now, John, once again, I cannot emphasize, no one told me this was about to happen. I'm just watching TV one day, and like Spider-Man's in there with Madam Webb, and I gotta ask. Actually, wait, right before this, Madam Webb, you have her prominently in season 3, but then she's not mentioned in season 4. But then she's kind of definitively part of season 5. What decision was it to add Madam Webb in the beginning and then to hold back on her?
Well, I did get resistance. Funny you should mention her. The resistance I got on her was Avi said, "I can't make a toy out of an old broad." One of Avi's famous quotes that I literally just heard yesterday in one of the tapes was, "I don't want to put anything on screen that I can't replicate in plastic." And I said to him, "I want to bring this character to life," and he said, "Well, I can't make a toy out of an old broad," and I did it anyway. In fact, the only Funko Pop that I own from Spider-Man is the one that they just recently did with Madam Webb. I'm so proud of the fact that he did end up having to make a Madam Webb toy. There's an action figure. I have it up over there somewhere. But yeah, he did make the toy, and I'm very proud of that. I don't remember. I think that I was starting to already think of how I wanted things to end, and there was the whole idea that she was going to teach Spider-Man something. Some episodes she worked in, and some episodes she didn't. I don't think I was thinking so much in terms of seasons, so that might have been why you had a long wait I think I was just thinking in terms of actual story placement and where she would fit in and where she wouldn't. She was definitely training him for something. Bob Richardson came up to me one day and he said, if you ever get hit by a bus, no one's going to know what you had in mind, because I kept it a secret. I didn't share it with anybody where this was all going.
Wow.
And because at that point I was signed to a contract, and I just thought, I don't need to tell anybody, because if I tell them, if I make it a point to tell somebody, they'll tell me I can't do it. Just because that's the way it always works. You tell somebody I'm leading up to this thing and I want to do this, and they'll say, oh no, you can't do that. So I thought, well, I just won't tell them. And then at the very end, I'll just spring it on them, and it worked, because by the time we got to the final 2 episodes, no one, I didn't have to get approval from anyone. The network had stopped calling. The original network guy was no longer on it. He had appointed someone who never called me. Avi was gone. Richardson really didn't have much control over story. And Stan was long gone. Stan left really after the first season. So I could do whatever I wanted at that point. And so it was the wise thing to not let anybody know. Because I'm sure if I had run it past Avi, he would have had a million reasons why it wouldn't have worked out.
So no one told me Secret Wars was going to happen. I mean, comic book fans, they had seen it, they had read it. But me, 1998, watch it on TV, something's happened to Beyonder, and he's on this alien planet. You see all the bad guys, and you're like, oh, that's not good. And then he's just like, you can bring people here. And then Peter, I'll never forget Christopher's performance, where he's like, computer, bring me the Fantastic Four. And you're like,
I need to assemble a team of people that I know can be useful to me. Okay. Now, who's fought that Dr. Doom guy before and won? Of course! Computer, can I transport to this planet the Fantastic Four?
Affirmative.
And it's like, oh yeah, bring me my friend Iron Man.
And there's another who was a big help to me against Carnage and Venom. My friend, Iron Man.
Affirmative.
And one of the X-Men. Storm. Cool.
Right.
And there's only one man who can fight the Red Skull. Captain America.
Affirmative.
Seeing all these people come together, you're like, Marvel is a universe.
Yeah.
So the Secret Wars happens, but then you go into this, and this is a very important thing that I wanted to bring up. You go into the Spider Wars, in which Peter, his ultimate test is to be the leader of a team of Spider-Men to take down a clone that's ruining everything.
Yeah.
Clones, I like to think of the clones that ruined everything were the ones in publication, because the Clone Saga sucked. And I read the whole thing, and it's a jarbled mess of a comic book, but it works really cool in a cartoon when you strip it down. Famously right now, there is this thing called the Spider-Verse movies, which are based on a comic book.
Yeah.
And it's getting all this critical acclaim, but I'm kind of like, to me, and my friends Marlon and Jason, my friend Jack, all these shout outs, Jake, all these people I'm telling you about right now, we all knew for years that Spider-Man can team up with a bunch of Spider-Mans from alternative realities. But I'm just a little surprised that pop culture wise, your show is not referenced as probably the inspiration of the first person to ever really say, yeah, Spider-Man from different realities are all going to team up. They're all going to fight. This happened in 1998. We're 2022. The movie was in 2017, 18.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? Because it was on one of your posts that I saw, you had mentioned that, and I'm just like, he's right.
Yeah,
He's
well,
right.
I will be very blatant about it. I created what is now called the Spider-Verse. I created that. Now, let's go back a bit. Remember I was telling you earlier about toys, okay? And, there being toys that were not used in the show, and I always felt that kind of thing was giving little kids the finger. There was a spider figure called Armored Spider-Man. And a lot of kids, I'm sure, went out and bought it. I never had Armored Spider-Man in my show. I knew that there were some other toys, and I thought, when you're trying to create things, you've got a lot of mandates. You've got a lot of things you're thinking of that you want to accomplish. So one of them was a big payoff for my series because I knew that we weren't going to go past 65, and I wanted to have it be huge. That was number one. So I thought the biggest thing will be having him save all of reality. Well, I had this wonderful dimensional portal technology. But then I thought, what can I do where I can literally get some of these Spider-Men in that were represented in these toys that were not in my show? So that was another little thought. It wasn't a big thought. It wasn't like I thought, oh, I must do this. It was, if I'm going to do something, wouldn't it be nice if I found a way, should I have Spider-Man build the armor? Should I, and then it occurred to me, if I've got multi-dimensions, why don't I have him meet different versions of himself? Now, that was the idea. It didn't come from a comic book. See, here's the problem I have with the whole idea of the Spider-Verse not being credited as coming from my show. My show was an animated show. For some odd reason, animation does not get the same amount of respect that some guy writing a comic book does, when in fact, the amount of talent required to write a really good animated show is much greater, I think, than what's required to write, a good comic book. I've written comic books. I did 19 issues of Cyborg for DC Comics. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I got to tell you, the amount of effort that I had to put into writing any cartoon show I've ever written is far greater than the amount of effort I had to put into writing a comic book. It's a different medium. It is a less demanding medium. It is a much more flexible medium. I'm talking about comic books. You're not restricted by the same needs of pacing and timing and act breaks and story structure. Some people write comic books and they're doing a story and then they just abruptly drop it because they move on to something else. And over month after month after month, you don't follow it that way. So, it's a long conversation, but in my experience, it is a much more complicated thing to write an animated show. Now, the problem is, if you are a cartoon writer, you do not get the same respect that you get as if you're a guy who wrote a comic book. So when it comes to the Spider-Verse, all the attention is on a comic book that it came from, and nobody looks at the cartoon show, which I think is really kind of crappy. Because we worked really hard and we did some good things. And I think a lot of things that we did later influenced the comic books. Case in point, the Spider-Verse. I don't live in the world of comics. So the fact that the Spider-Verse is this big, gigantic thing that it has become, if you're a comic book geek fan, for a guy like me to say I created the Spider-Verse is blasphemy. People get very angry when I say this, like I'm claiming to have, invented electricity or, discovered electricity or, done some amazing achievement that the Western world will benefit from for years to come. I don't think of it that way. Creating the Spider-Verse was a good idea I had for my show. I was looking for a really good story idea. I wanted to end big. It was a great ending. I think it was a really clever idea. I think that, that was my job, was to be clever and come up with clever ideas. That's what I do for a living. So in 1994, 95, whenever, I had this idea, it was me doing my job. We were the #1 series on Saturday morning, us and X-Men. I had to come up with an ending that was worthy of the #1 show. I'm not claiming to be the greatest genius in pop culture. What I am claiming to be is a guy who had an idea, and I want to be given credit for that idea. I want our show to be given credit for that idea. I don't know who claims credit for the idea. I don't read comic books. I'm sure there's a comic book guy that claims credit for it. I'm sure if you grill him, which nobody ever seems to do, from what I understand, he was involved in a computer game that, shattered dimensions, where there were some multiple Spider-Men. The funny thing about Shattered Dimensions is that one of the writers on that game was Mark Hoffmeyer, who was a staff writer on my show. So there's a direct connection between Shattered Dimensions and my show.
Christopher also voices one of them.
Christopher did one of the Spider-Man. So all I know is when I had the idea of Spider-Man fighting alongside multiple versions of himself, it was a brand new idea to me. I had not read it in a comic book. One guy said, well, you didn't invent parallel universes. No, I didn't. And I'm not claiming to. And one guy said, this is all online because that's where everyone's angry. Everyone online is angry. And so one angry online person said, well, the Flash, famous Flash issue where he met an earlier version of himself. And so that is the precedent. Well, great. If you're going to consider that the origin of the Spider-Verse, then the guy who wrote the comic book isn't the guy who originated the Spider-Verse. I mean, you can, if you want to leapfrog over me and say, well, you didn't do anything because they did this in the Flash, which, by the way, I wouldn't have known anyway because I don't read the Flash. Then the guy who did the Flash created the Spider-Verse. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Agreed.
There is only one place where Spider-Man first fought alongside multiple versions of himself from different universes, all of whom had different personalities. They all had different personalities. And that's the final 2 episodes of my show. And that was my idea. That's the reality. The great thing about anyone arguing against this is that all I have to say to them is just watch the last 2 episodes of my show. I don't have to argue it. I bring it up because we're talking about it.
Of course.
But that's the reality. Where the idea came from, it was a combination of toys and me wanting to come up with something big for the end of my show and me being a clever guy. End of story.
Why is it in you as a writer, and by the way, everything you just said is 100% true. Is 100% true. Even the game Shattered Dimensions, I'm like, oh yeah, they probably got this idea from the animated series. I always think of that. But just a little shout out to the game Shattered Dimensions. It was kind of cool that everybody who voiced Spider-Man in those games had been Spider-Man in an animated form or another, including Neil Patrick Harris with the CGI show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Mark Hoffmeyer, because from the earliest days of my working on the show, Mark was my first hire as a staff writer. He was alongside me during a lot of the early development. He went to a lot of the meetings where, we were, as writers, we were being beaten up. I don't know that I could have gotten through the show, certainly the early years of the show, the early months of the show, without Mark at my side. And so his involvement in my show is huge. And his involvement in Shattered Dimensions is huge. And so, why aren't we talking about Mark Hoffmeyer and Stan Berkowitz and Jim Krieg? Jim is now in charge of all the wonderful Warner Brothers animated DC Universe features. Jim's in charge of all of those. Jim started working on my show. These are the names that people should be talking about in terms of Spider-Verse. And, I have a tape of myself telling Mark and Jim my idea for what would later become the Spider-Verse. So the 2 guys who then had to take it and run with it were Mark Hoffmeyer and Jim Krieg. So if you're going to talk about the creation of the Spider-Verse, now here's my point. If you're going to do a scroll of thank yous at the end of those Spider-Verse movies, John Semper's name should be there. Mark Hoffmeyer's name should be there. Jim Krieg's name should be there. All our names should be there. DC does this all the time. When you get to the end of a DC show or DC movie, there's a long list of people. Anyone who has ever touched the character gets a thank you. I would like to see that happen. I will state it here. I would like to see that happen at the end of the next Spider-Verse movie. There should be a thank you to the 3 of us at least. For having done the work that we did in creating what is now called the Spider-Verse. Your Honor, I rest my case.
Yeah, well, it's important to say these kind of things because for 70 years, people were under the impression that Bob Kane was the sole creator of Batman, but now we all know better that Bill Finger had a major contribution to that. So
Yeah, I figure when I drop dead, slumped in front of my computer, then people will take up this cause and run with it. It's the great thing is it is in the episodes,
Of
so
course.
I almost don't have to really ever say anything. And I think also I'm not a person who ever really wanted to be famous, so I pretty much kind of successfully worked in the shadows for my 40-year career. So people who needed to know who I was know who I am. But I never really needed to have a public persona, something Stan was always very good at. Stan always had a wonderful public persona. I'm currently reading Danny Fingeroth's excellent book about the his biography of Stan. And one of the things that becomes apparent very early on was that Stan understood the value of cultivating a public persona with the whole face front and Excelsior and the whole thing. I'm not that guy. So, when I first started telling people, oh, I invented the Spider-Verse, it was like, well, who are you? And part of the reason that I now do these interviews a little bit more is because I want people to know who I am. And I think it's important in terms of just everyone having a proper perspective on creativity in general and who creates what. So there you go.
Absolutely. And just a quick shout out. Love the interpretations of all the Spider-Man from the other realities. I love the fact that, Metal Spider-Man's kind of like if he was more like an Tony Stark asshole, like really, really confident in himself, where Peter's kind of like a very handsome Charlie Brown. But, this guy Uncle Ben's alive. Jameson loves him, has zero self-doubt. And then you have the other one who's like currently going through the transformation and still having all having those season 2 growing pains. Then you have another one that was willing to use Doc Ock's technology, but I think your Peter in the regular universe wouldn't do that. And maybe that's another reason why he's the leader. So this is just a bunch of thoughts that I've been thinking about, in the last like 24 hours. But then you have this actor from the real world. And then you do this beautiful thing where after the day is saved through the heart of Spider-Man, Uncle Ben, great way to do it. Instead of punching him until he's hamburger, he wins with reminding Peter about the soul he has. You meet the man who first called you in the beginning of this Spider-Man journey to come help out the show.
Yeah.
You bring Stan Lee in, and that public persona you're talking about. Even to me, I was well aware that Stan Lee was Stan Lee, and the voice and the expressions, all of it comes together. But it will forever be immortalized in this little piece of animation. And when Stan died, that's the thing I turned on, dude. I went to the last episode of Spider-Man and saw Spider-Man talking to him. And that's the way I wanted to remember Stan, in almost the animated, surreal form of him. Can you tell me about involving Stan in that last episode?
Yeah, that was totally my idea. It wasn't done just as a grandstanding kind of thing. It was done because it was the hero's journey, and I wanted Spider-Man to turn to his creator and say, "I'm not the guy you created anymore. I'm beyond that. I like myself." So it was important to me that moment occur, because that justified all 65 episodes, and it made it an entire complete story. We start out with this very insecure guy, and we end up with a guy who can turn to his creator and say, "No, I'm all right. And I've done well."
For so long, I've thought that I never got any breaks. But now, after all I've been through, for once, I like my life. I like myself. And for the first time ever, I wouldn't want to change anything about me.
Gee, you're definitely not the same guy I've been writing about all these years.
Well, Stan, we all have to grow up sometime, I suppose. Even us characters of fiction.
Getting Stan to do it was easy. I said, "Stan, I want you to be in the episode." He went, "Okay." Sure. Face front, Excelsior. It was cool that Madam Webb had been played by Joan Lee. I wrote Madam Webb for Joan Lee. I wrote it for her voice, Stan's wife. And so the very first, I actually shot Super 8, not Super 8, 8mm video of the final recording session, where I have Stan and Joan in the booth.
I
And,
didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Joan Lee played Madam Webb. Do you hear this, audience? I didn't. That's not common knowledge, man.
Well,
It's time to go.
Who is that exotic lady?
Oh, her? She's my ride.
some people know it. I've mentioned it a few times online, but yeah, that's Joan Lee, and I wrote it.
Yeah, but I'm a dumbass, John. Like, we've been through this. But please continue.
I wrote it for her. I wrote it absolutely for Joan. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Madam Webb in. I thought, oh, I want Joan, because Joan had this very distinctive voice with a British accent, and I really loved her. She was very sweet. Stan and Joan were always good to me. Stan was a complete asshole to me when we would get into writing conferences. I'm now rehearing all of these meetings, and Stan is my biggest critic. But I loved Stan to death. I love him to this day. I wouldn't have had the gig if it weren't for him. He's the one who brought me over there and hired me. I really, Stan was great, and I loved Joan, and I loved hanging out with them. I thought they were great people. So I wrote Madam Webb for Joan, and then I had Stan come in at the end, and that's why at the very end, Madam Webb says something to Peter like,
That's Stan Lee. He's quite a guy.
I think he's truly special.
Well, Madam Webb, where to now?
and that's Joan talking to Stan. I wrote that dialogue for Joan to be able to praise Stan. I wrote that scene. It was an important scene to me. And when Stan is on top of the building after Spider-Man leaves him, and he says, I got to call Pam to get me down. That's Pam Duvall, Stan's actual secretary. That was our building that we were in at that time. We were in a big building in Van Nuys. Yeah, I mean, I really, because that character was Chris Barnes, that actor Spider-Man was from our reality, and he was Chris Barnes. In fact, when I was re-listening to the meeting where I was pitching the story, telling the story to Jim and Mark, I was saying, and then this guy is Chris, and we would just keep referring to him as Chris. And by the way, during that meeting, we were grabbing toys, and we were, okay, we'll use this guy. Okay, what about this guy? What about that guy? And we're figuring it all out with the toys in our hands. No, I love that episode. I love those last two episodes because I can't imagine ending it any other way. And speaking of ending, we probably should wrap this up, but I will say this. A lot of people talk about how I ended the show on a cliffhanger because I didn't actually show Peter getting together with Mary Jane. Well, there are several reasons why I didn't do that. The first was, on the very, 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 very off chance that maybe we were going to get a chance to continue the series, which I already knew we weren't, but I thought, you never know, maybe a year from now, somebody might decide to want to pick it up again and do it. So I left that one little thread there for maybe a continuation. But the other thing was, for me, the hero's journey is not about getting the girl. The hero's journey is about understanding the value of being a hero. So at the very end, when Chris says, I like myself, to his creator, to Stan, that's the end of the hero's journey. That's the story I was telling. When Madam Webb says, now let's go get Mary Jane, well, we sort of know Madam Webb's pretty powerful, and we sort of know that she understands how to do these things. So we sort of know that he's going to get Mary Jane. So it isn't a cliffhanger because, and I just wrote this in a post the other day, a cliffhanger comes from the way that they used to end silent serials where somebody would be hanging off a cliff at the end of the chapter, literally hanging off a cliff. And because at the end of every chapter of a serial, somebody was in dire jeopardy or impending doom, serials came to be known as cliffhangers because that symbolized, hanging off of a cliff symbolized dire jeopardy or impending doom. There is no dire jeopardy or impending doom at the end of my series. Nobody is on the verge of being destroyed. Nobody is in dire peril. It's not a cliffhanger. I mean, technically, that's what a cliffhanger is. So I do get tired of people saying, well, the series ended on a cliffhanger. That's so dumb because it isn't a cliffhanger. Everybody's okay. Everything's been resolved. And Madam Webb says, let's go get Mary Jane. And that's the end of my series. If anything, it can be accused of ending on an unresolved plot point, which if we had gone to a second season or another season would have been resolved. That would have been the first thing I would have done. But it's not a cliffhanger. My series did not end on a cliffhanger. Stop saying it, people.
And if anything, the real Mary Jane has no idea Peter Parker's Spider-Man. So
Yeah.
he'd show up and she'd be like, Spider-Man, the hell are you doing here?
Right. Well, I actually wrote a script called Peter Finds Mary Jane. It's a whole adventure that takes place with regard to how Peter finds Mary Jane and how he gets her back and what happens. It would have been, I would think, if I had been given 2 or 3 or 4 episodes to resolve the series, this is what I would have done. This is exactly what I would have done. So I got that out of my system. That will live on in posterity. At some point, I'm sure it's floating around out there in all kinds of bootleg copies or something of that sort. But at any rate, there is on record how I would have ended the series. I wanted to do that because I didn't want somewhere down the line for people to pick up where I left off and go off in some weird direction. I wanted to have my finality, versus anyone else's. But I really feel like the series is complete in and of itself. I don't feel like it needs anything more. I think it's a really great piece of work. I'm very proud of it. It's probably what I will be remembered for. Although I do have a really cool DC thing coming out, soon this summer, and I'm still doing stuff. But probably I will be remembered for Spider-Man, and I really wouldn't have it any other way because I think it's a great series, and I think all of us worked really hard on it. No one person makes an animated series; it is a group effort. So Avi gets credit for having made it all happen. Stan gets credit for being involved. All my staff writers worked really hard and are great and talented writers. I think we did a really good thing.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an understatement given the gravitas that series has. Both you and X-Men are both so fondly remembered from people where you're like, yo, you want to know what a real animated series is? Those 2 shows in the 90s really were game changers, and I think cartoons in general and popular culture benefited greatly from the effort that you put into it. John, thanks so much for coming by today. 2 quick things.
Yeah.
Where can people find you on social media to keep track of your career? Because now you're doing more interviews. I'm sure people like to, even though the term when I was growing up, the term they want to follow you was a bad thing, but apparently it's a term of endearment now. But where can people follow you? And if what's happening with X-Men 97, where they're getting a continuation, would you ever consider doing that?
Well, people can follow me on Facebook. I'm mostly on Facebook. And I realize that Facebook is falling out of favor with a lot of people, but it satisfies me because I can write the things that I want to write at length. I'm not hemmed in by Twitter. And Instagram, I'm a little bit on Instagram, but you can find me, just look for John Semper on Facebook or facebook.com/John Semper or John Semper Jr., I believe I am. I'm easy to find. I'm easy to find on Instagram. Please find me, follow me on Facebook. I also have a website, johnsemper.com, all one word, JOHNSEMPER. But really, Facebook. I'm there every day on Facebook. What was the last thing you asked me?
I just said, X-Men just got a continuation on Disney Plus. Would you do that given the fact you've kept this, secret ending close to the chest?
Yeah. I'll tell you why that won't happen. First of all, the reason X-Men can happen, bottom line, is that Disney now owns X-Men lock, stock, and barrel after the purchase of Fox. So they can do whatever they want with X-Men. But Disney will never 100% own Spider-Man. So whatever they do has to be done in conjunction with Sony. And I don't foresee that Sony is ever going to give up Spider-Man. It's not in my lifetime, I don't think. So I think that with Spider-Man, Disney kind of has to do the Sony Spider-Man, which quite frankly is a character that I can enjoy in the movies, but I don't understand him. It's like all these people know his identity, and his girlfriend knows his identity, and the little, the sidekick friend knows his identity, and I don't understand that character. So the prospect, plus I can never figure out who owns my series. I assume Disney owns it, but I don't know why they've never brought it out on DVD. That's the other question people always ask me, as if I own the series. Like, why aren't you out on DVD? Well, I don't know, because I don't own it. So you would have to ask Disney. And I must say, there are certain entities that have always offered me work. DC has always offered me work. Warner's, I've always, I've always gotten really good work from Warner's. Disney never offers me work. I have never. I think I'm on some kind of blacklist over there. And it's fine. I'm gainfully employed, and I've never stopped being employed. But I've never been asked to do anything over at Disney. That's fine. That's cool. Disney can continue being Disney, and John Semper can continue being John Semper, and I'll be fine. So for those two reasons, one is Disney doesn't 100% own Spider-Man, and so I think that it gets complicated. Number two, I've never been particularly well liked at Disney. Number three, I'm an old guy now, in theory. So I'm not anybody's first choice necessarily for doing animated shows anymore. I still work. But if they're going to do a big franchise show now, like Spider-Man, I don't think they're going to call me up. They're going to call up, like the kind of people that they have doing the Spider-Man show now, which are ironically probably live action people. And I always find that really kind of strange, but so yeah, I'm not a big enough name to get a Spider-Man show now. But I would love, I think if I could have this, okay, so this is number 4. What was I up to? I think I was up to number 4. I would not be able to have the kind of control that I had because Spider-Man is this mega franchise now, even bigger than it was before. And they're not going to hand it over to me and let me have the kind of control that I had over my series, which was a lot. So that's the part that would make me not want to do it. Unless somebody just said, here, have Spider-Man and left me alone. I don't want to work with the corporate entity that a lot of people have their hands on.
Of course.
We can't do that because, in Indonesia, we were selling dolls that have this color, and so we can't do, that kind of thing doesn't interest me at all. I was very lucky. I had this wonderful sweet spot where I could control this character in a way that was really comfortable for me. And it was a wonderful, wonderful connection, a wonderful opportunity. And I just don't think that would ever happen again. So I would have to go make a gigantic, big selling movie like Dune, and then maybe they'd come to me and say, well, we'll let you do this because you're a big famous filmmaker. But I don't think they're going to let John Semper handle that character quite that way anymore. So,
well, to go off on a strong note, because I'm sure a lot of fans are just going to be like, there's not going to be more. And it's like, not realizing how, it's not that easy to do. Every episode starts off with a theme song, and this is a strong theme song that people still love to this day. They referenced the 1960s one and this one was the cool one. And Mr. Joe Perry plays guitar on this one.
Fellow Bostonian. I'm from Boston. He's a fellow Bostonian.
How about that guy from Aerosmith?
Was the theme song kind of already together by the time you were joined in, or was this just some lovely icing on the cake?
Avi Arad was sitting in first class on a plane flight from New York to LA, or LA to New York, and he ended up sitting next to Joe Perry. And they got to talking, and Joe Perry said, well, I'd love to do a theme song for you. And Avi Arad said, that would be great. And that's how we got the theme song. And it was not anything that anyone planned. It only happened midway through us doing the first season, and I think it was one of the best. Again, just really good luck.
Awesome. All right, everybody. When you're on a plane, put down your phone, look left, look right, because you might be sitting next to somebody that can change your life. Thank you very much, John, for coming on the show. This has been absolutely lovely.
Let me say this. It's fans like you, Ryan, that make it all worthwhile. I've got a bunch of super fans out there. I'll mention Tim Barker. I'll mention Matt Dunford. Fans like Ryan Stick are what makes me able to even get on and talk like this. And I love all you guys that still really love this show. I really love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for everybody for watching. Thanks to everybody who watched both parts on both channels and subscribed to both channels. And it's been an absolutely amazing, honorable experience to be able to talk to John. I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I loved conducting it. And I'll see you next time on You, Me, and YTV. And in the words of the late, great Stan Lee, Excelsior.
Check out more episodes of You, Me, and YTV on Facebook and YouTube. Sweet one-of-a-kind interviews with PJ Fresh Bill, PJ Paul, Tarzan Dan, the cast of Student Bodies, the voice acting cast of Sailor Moon, and much, much more. Exclusively on You, Me, and YTV.